Athens, in May. The air hung heavy, trapped between whitewashed walls stained with sea salt. Greek summer nights were usually gentle, but that night felt burdened, as if the sky itself was straining to hold back a secret on the verge of breaking. From afar, a dog barked through the narrow alleys of Glika Nera, then suddenly fell silent, leaving behind a suffocating void. The dull yellow glow of streetlights cast distorted shapes across the walls, flickering over the sparse olive leaves, stretching like the shadow of an omen creeping through the dark. In the two-story house at the end of a quiet lane, the white-painted door stood ajar, creaking softly as the wind brushed against the hinges. Within that darkness, only the thin, desperate cries of a baby echoed in fragments, trembling and fragile. When the police broke down the door, a gust of cold air from the air conditioner mingled with the stifling stillness of the trapped atmosphere. On the floor lay strips of torn fabric scattered among muddy footprints that trailed toward the staircase, where a small dog hung lifeless from a leash, neck bent, body slack. The air reeked of metal and plastic, every breath sliced like a blade through the lungs. Upstairs, the bedroom light still burned, illuminating a scene so quiet it was unbearable. The cream-colored sheets were wrinkled, the pillow displaced, the blanket twisted halfway as if from a violent struggle. On the tangled bed lay a young woman on her side, face obscured by a pillowcase, dark hair matted at the nape of her neck. One pale hand hung over the edge, fingers curled as though frozen in the act of fighting back. Beside her body, an infant barely a year old wailed uncontrollably, face flushed red in the flickering light. The first officer to lift the child trembled, unable to speak when he noticed the mother's eyes half open, dry and bloodshot, with deep bruises ringing her throat. Outside, neighbors gathered near the patrol car, staring at the house in horror disbelief mixed with dread. This had been a peaceful neighborhood, once the picture of domestic bliss. A pilot husband, a young wife caring for their baby, a small dog playing in the yard. Everything arranged neatly, almost too perfect, like a magazine ad for a dream life. Yet that night, the picture cracked, revealing something cold and distorted beneath the surface. And you, when are you listening to this story? Is the sky outside your window still glowing faintly? Or has night already fallen? Do you feel safe where you are? Have you ever considered that even within the comfort of your own home, there may be horrors lurking silent, unseen? Tonight, we'll uncover a case so full of unexpected twists that even the investigators were left in stunned silence. The girl in question was named Caroline Crouch, 20 years old, born in England, but raised on the tranquil island of Alonissos, where the blue sea lapped at white cliffs and mornings began with the sound of church bells blending into the rhythm of fishermen's oars. She was the only daughter of a British couple who had long settled in Greece, growing up amid the scent of salt and the golden summers, carrying the unspoiled brightness of youth, untouched by darkness. Friends remembered Caroline for her gentle smile, her soft voice, and the way her gaze tended to drift whenever someone called her beautiful. In photos, she often wore her hair tied high, dressed in loose t-shirts, cradling a kitten, or sitting on the porch, reading under the fading light of dusk. She loved taking pictures, swimming far into the small bays, and once said that the sea of Alonissos tastes like freedom. At 16, Caroline met a man named Bobis Anagnostopoulos, a helicopter pilot 13 years older than her during a training flight passing over the island. She was just a girl dreaming of a wider world. He was a man who came from the sky, self-assured, with a warm voice and a confident smile. People would later recall how Caroline's eyes seemed to shine differently whenever she spoke about him. Their love bloomed quickly, an intense kind of attachment that pulled her away from the island to Athens, where she moved in with him in a 2-story house with a lavender garden. On social media, they appeared to be the perfect couple, sun-drenched photos in Santorini, kisses on the beach, captions like, "My one and only." To the outside world, theirs was a modern fairy tale. A young woman leaving her quiet island to find love and a home in the vibrant city. When Caroline gave birth to their first daughter, Lydia, It seemed they had reached happiness complete. In a photograph taken at the hospital, Bobby's holding the baby, Caroline's hand resting on his shoulder. Their joy looked genuine enough to move anyone who saw it. She adored her child more than anything. Yet after the birth, she began to withdraw, appearing less often, and communicating even less. Friends assumed she was busy, that motherhood had simply absorbed her. No one noticed how the smiles in her last pictures had begun to fade, or how her eyes carried a quiet exhaustion, as if something inside was dimming. Later, in a small notebook found by investigators, a few trembling lines written in English revealed more than any photograph ever could. "Today I felt trapped again. He keeps watching me. I tried to breathe, but the air felt heavy." At 20, Caroline was still a student, a young mother, and an aspiring psychologist. She had once said she wanted to study fear in human relationships, a thought that might have seemed abstract at the time. Yet her own life was slowly, silently, becoming the very proof of it. Everyone who had known Caroline remembered her as calm, gentle, with eyes that carried a softness few could explain. She rarely lost her temper, always smiling when others spoke. Yet in the last photograph taken in Nera, where she lived with her husband and baby daughter, she was looking back over her shoulder, and in that fleeting glance, there was something strange. As if, amid the calm of her surroundings, some instinct within her had already sensed a shadow drawing near. Perhaps that moment, that hesitant look, tinged with quiet fear beneath the daylight, was the final image of Caroline as the world had known her, before everything inside that house shattered. Caroline's last day began like any other, so peaceful it might have fooled fate itself. The morning sun of Athens was radiant. Sparrows chirped outside the window, and the salty wind from the Aegean drifted through the cracks, brushing against the lavender pot on the balcony. She woke early, made milk for Lydia, then opened the windows wide. Inside the small house, the scent of baby powder mingled with the warmth of coffee, a morning so tender, it seemed nothing dark could ever intrude. Around 10 o'clock, Caroline sent a short message to a friend in Alonissos. Just a few casual words. She played with her daughter afterward. Soft acoustic music filling the room, the same kind of melodies that had always accompanied her study sessions. At noon, she logged into her online class, typing a few lines into an unfinished paper. Her digital diary later recorded that she left her desk at 2:45 p.m., the screen still glowing, the cursor blinking in the middle of an incomplete sentence. Neighbors would recall that the afternoon was bright, and they saw her pushing a stroller around the block. No makeup, hair tied up, a quiet, composed figure. From the outside, everything appeared completely ordinary. That evening, the lights in the house came on earlier than usual. From the street, one could see faint light filtering through the curtains, casting interwoven shadows on the walls, sometimes moving, sometimes still. Perhaps it was Caroline feeding her child, tidying up the room, or quietly scrolling through photos on her small camera, a habit she often indulged in before bed. She loved the night, the stillness of Athens when everyone else had fallen asleep, the whisper of wind through the trees, the soft ticking of the clock. But that night, Nera felt heavier than usual, as if something unseen had slipped into the calm, pressing down on the air. The next morning, when the milk delivery man passed by, he noticed the door of house number 10 still shut. He paused, peered at the motionless entrance, then shook his head and moved on, assuming the family was still asleep. Athens glowed in the sunlight. The white houses reflected the brilliance of the sea. No one knew that behind that closed door, Caroline Crouch's world had already ended. It wasn't until news spread that police had sealed the scene, that ambulances lined the street, that yellow tape now blocked the entrance, that the quiet neighborhood of Nera broke into a chorus of shocked whispers. People recounted the last time they saw her. A petite figure, hair tied high, wearing a pale coat, her eyes brushing briefly over someone, before darting away. A look, half friendly, half guarded. As the tragedy rippled through the community, everyone tried to remember if anything unusual had ever happened, but all that remained were puzzled shakes of the head. In a place like Glycanera, where life moved in the inertia of peace, people had grown used to believing that tragedy was always something that happened elsewhere. When police arrived in the early hours of dawn, the first sunlight cut across the Athens suburbs, slanting into the two-story house that had once been filled with warmth. The pale yellow police tape fluttered gently in the breeze, glinting coldly against the muddy shoe prints stamped across the doorstep. Inside, the air was thick, a suffocating blend of disinfectant, forensic powder, and the lingering chill of the still-running air conditioner. Investigators in protective suits moved slowly, documenting every trace. Footprints on the tile floor, a few torn fibers beneath the staircase, the back door ajar, a broken lock, and a ground-floor window showing signs of forced entry. Every clue seemed to point in one direction: a violent home invasion. In the bedroom, drawers were pulled out, the safe stood open, money and jewelry gone. Beneath the staircase, the family's dog had been killed and hung from a beam, like a blood-stained warning. It all painted a horrifying picture of a ruthless, calculated robbery. In those first hours, Greek police mobilized massively. Roadblocks were set up around Athens. Major exits to the suburbs were sealed, and lists of wanted Eastern European fugitives known to operate in the area were checked line by line. The media erupted. Newspapers splashed front-page headlines like "Barbaric Robbery Shocks the Nation." TV crews broadcast live from Glycanera, reporters crowding around the front gate while stunned residents whispered among themselves. To the public, this was an act of random violence, proof that crime had infiltrated even the most peaceful neighborhoods. Even seasoned investigators shuddered at the brutality. A murdered pet, a mother strangled before her infant daughter, a husband tied and left unconscious. By the next morning, Caroline's face was everywhere, her photograph framed in the sterile white of mourning, printed and replayed across every channel. It became the symbol of national grief, of fear and outrage shared across Greece. To the public, Caroline Crouch was the perfect victim. Young, kind, innocent, killed by strangers who had broken into her home in the dead of night. No one knew then that within a matter of weeks, that very narrative would collapse completely. And behind the story of what seemed to be a random tragedy lay a performance so meticulously staged that it left an entire country breathless. After the murder, Babis Anagnostopoulos, the husband of the slain young woman, was the first to call the police. His voice trembled over the phone as he claimed that 3 masked men had broken into the house during the night, tied him up, knocked him unconscious, then killed his wife before fleeing with cash and valuables. When officers arrived, they found him sitting in a chair, wrists loosely bound, his face streaked with blood, the baby lying beside her mother's lifeless body. His story was disturbingly detailed. The robbers spoke a foreign language, demanded money, threatened to kill the child, then attacked when Caroline resisted. The press instantly hailed him as the brave husband. He was portrayed as a man shattered but composed, a tragic hero who had survived an unimaginable ordeal. During his first interviews, he cried openly, speaking of a pain beyond repair, pleading with the public to help the police find the killers. For a time, all of Greece believed him. Yet the deeper the investigators dug, the more the story began to unravel. The first clue was small, almost trivial, but it made them stop writing mid-sentence: the back door. The broken lock showed cracks from the inside out, not the other way around. Someone inside the house had broken it deliberately to stage a break-in. Then came the rope that Babis claimed the robbers used to tie him up. It was the kind of cord sold at any local supermarket for bundling packages, not the type typically used by professional burglars. And curiously, most valuable items, the laptop, phones, cameras, were untouched. Only the safe had been opened, yet no foreign fingerprints were found. One officer jotted a brief note in the margin: "Staged robbery alternative motive?" Then, there was Caroline's smartwatch. Data from the device revealed that her heart rate had spiked sharply at 4:05 a.m., peaking before stopping abruptly at 4:11. the exact window investigators later confirmed as her time of death. Meanwhile, Babis's phone remained active after that time, moving within different areas of the house. This directly contradicted his claim of being tied up and unconscious. Even more troubling, the home security camera system, designed to record continuously, had stopped working precisely at 1:20 a.m., just hours before Caroline's death. The memory card was missing, the hard drive dismantled. When questioned, Babis insisted the robbers had taken it. But detectives found that hard to believe. How could intruders have known the exact location of a hidden civilian security setup? Digital forensics went further. From his phone's motion sensors and GPS logs, technicians discovered dozens of small movements through the night, around the ground floor and stairway. A digital analyst stated plainly, "Data doesn't lie. Someone was walking, turning on lights, unlocking the phone at least 3 times during the window when he was supposedly unconscious." And then came the forensic report, a cold, clinical account that stripped away the last layers of deceit. The bruises on Caroline's neck and face showed she had been suffocated for roughly 5 minutes, preceded by a violent struggle. Under her fingernails were tiny fibers, later matched to the same type of fabric found on the floor near the staircase. Each new detail widened the cracks in Babis's carefully constructed story. When police combed the house again, they found no sign of forced entry, apart from the back door, the one broken from within. Everything pointed inward. The Wi-Fi logs even recorded someone logging into the network at 4:23 a.m., when Caroline was already dead. And from Babis's own drone, investigators retrieved flight data showing it had been activated shortly afterward, circling above the neighborhood for several minutes, as if someone were checking whether the neighbors were awake. As the puzzle pieces fell into place, the air in the investigation room grew heavier. The officers no longer saw a victimized husband, but a man who had built a perfect lie, a meticulously engineered illusion, told through trembling words, calculated pauses, and staged chaos, convincing enough to fool an entire nation. But the evidence, cold, digital, unblinking, had already spoken, and it could no longer be denied. The turning point came on the 40th day of Caroline's memorial. On the morning of June 17th, the island of Alanisos shimmered under the sunday. Locals gathered around the small chapel on the hill, holding white flowers, murmuring prayers for the young woman who had died too soon. Among the crowd stood Babis Anagnostopoulos, dressed in a dark shirt, holding his baby daughter in his arms. He bowed his head, eyes glistening, accepting hugs, condolences, and sympathetic glances. Cameras captured every second, the grieving husband cradling his child amid a sea of mourners, an image that moved the entire nation. No one knew that at that very moment, in Athens, a warrant for his arrest had already been signed. A police helicopter took off quietly from the capital, slicing across the Aegean sky toward Alanisos. When the service ended, and the church bells tolled one last time over the hillside, the aircraft descended. As the crowd lowered their heads in prayer, a plainclothes officer approached Babis, whispered something into his ear. He nodded, still holding his daughter, and followed without resistance. His face remained sorrowful, composed, almost saint-like in its calm. No one among the mourners realized they were witnessing the exact moment the curtain of deceit fell. On the flight back to Athens, Babis sat in silence, staring out the window. In the pale midday light, his face looked eerily calm, almost empty. At police headquarters, he was escorted into an interrogation room. Before him lay sheets of paper, phone records, heart rate charts, screenshots of the camera system being disabled. He said nothing for 8 minutes. In that sterile room, the grief was gone. What remained was a cold stillness, the quiet tension of a man calculating his next move. Outside, the country was still mourning, unaware that its heroic survivor was now face to face with the truth he had built himself. The smiling photos, the tearful interviews, the touching tributes, all now fragments of a carefully rehearsed performance. Babas sat upright, hands neatly placed on the table, voice smooth and deliberate, as though reciting a memorized script. He retold the night of the crime with uncanny precision. When the robbers entered, how they tied him up, how they beat him, how his wife died. Every detail fit together too perfectly, unnaturally so. The clarity of his account chilled the room. It was as if he weren't describing a tragedy, but reenacting a role he had practiced countless times. The investigators exchanged glances in silence. Only when a bead of sweat rolled slowly down his temple did the thin line between performance and reality begin to show. And then, after nearly 10 hours of questioning, he exhaled a long, weary sigh, his voice softening, almost fragile, like a man who had spent all his energy sustaining a lie. That night, we argued. She got angry. I lost control. It was an accident, he said. Those few words cut through the room like a blade, the final strike of truth. Caroline's death had not come from the hands of intruders, but from the man sitting right there, the one she had trusted most. His confession was weightless, almost casual, as if a few quiet words could erase the brutality of what he had done. But it hadn't been a moment of blind rage. When police revisited the evidence, they uncovered a long chain of tiny, overlooked fragments, hurried messages, broken confessions, pages from a diary written in trembling English, as if Caroline had been trying to speak out, to be saved, again and again. What had begun as a hopeful love had been slowly, deliberately deformed, until it became a cage she could no longer recognize. Babies controlled everything: her time, her movements, her words, even her breath. The younger she was, the more he felt entitled to mold her, to shape her into what he wanted. He was the kind of man society admired for his confidence and success. Yet beneath the surface lay a consuming obsession with possession, not just of things, but of people. Those who knew them recalled how Bobby's always appeared with her at gatherings, his arm draped protectively, almost possessively over her shoulder. His touch looked affectionate from afar, but up close it felt like a warning, a quiet assertion of territory. When she spoke, he interrupted. When someone asked her something, he answered. When she chose clothes, meals, even friends, all filtered through him. After baby Lydia was born, his control became total. The bright two-story house in Glycanera turned into a sealed world, rotting quietly from the inside. That final night, Caroline wanted to leave. Maybe just to breathe. Maybe for good, no one would ever know. She carried her baby downstairs, perhaps in a moment of instinct or defiance, and reached for the door. The sound woke Bobby's. He came down, snatched the phone from her hand. The argument began sharp, low, suffocating. Data later showed that at 4:05 a.m., Caroline opened her photo gallery, likely to look at pictures of her daughter, a fragile attempt to calm herself. 5 minutes later, her heart rate spiked, and 6 minutes after that, it stopped completely. The forensic report described her death in chilling, clinical terms. Victim suffered mechanical asphyxiation. No stab wounds, no blunt trauma. It meant she died by suffocation, a slow, conscious death, unfolding in silence. He had taken the pillow from their bed, pressed it down over her face, and held it there while her small hands clawed and pushed in desperate resistance. In that darkened room, there were no screams, only the fractured rhythm of her breathing and the coarse scrape of fabric against skin. When she stopped moving, he kept the pressure for a few seconds longer to make sure life had truly left her body. Then he stood up and carried their 11-month-old daughter out of the room. The baby's dark eyes blinked in confusion, then filled with tears. Her soft cries echoed through the room where warmth had just vanished. He laid her in her crib, adjusted the blanket, and turned to look back. Caroline was still lying on her side, one arm draped over the edge of the bed, her dark hair spilling across a face now tinged with blue. In that moment, he could have called for help. He could have saved something, perhaps not her life, but at least the truth. Instead, he chose another path, to build a stage. He went downstairs, where the family's small dog cowered beneath the stairs. He took the leash, looped it around the beam, and pulled it tight, methodical, deliberate, as if completing the final act of a plan. Then, he returned to the living room, grabbed a roll of fabric strap used for packaging, and loosely tied his own wrists a prop to suggest captivity. Next, he broke the back door lock from the inside, shattering it outward to fake a break-in. He opened the safe, removed cash and jewelry, but only a little, just enough to make the story believable. The rest he hid neatly in the adjoining room, arranged with precision. Every movement was calculated, every object placed with intent. The house was no longer a crime scene, it was a stage, constructed with the cold discipline of a man directing his own tragedy. A performance written, rehearsed, and executed, all to disguise the truth that the monster was never outside the door. It had been living there, beside her, all along. After he finished staging every detail, he returned to the bedroom and lay down beside Caroline's body. Two figures, side by side, separated by only a few centimeters, yet an eternity apart. He picked up the phone, dialed, and with a trembling voice rehearsed to perfection, whispered, "There's been a robbery. They killed my wife." And so the performance began. The first audience was the emergency operator on the other end, listening to his heavy, broken breaths echo through the line. In the days that followed, he lived surrounded by sympathy. While the nation mourned, the police continued to quietly connect the dots, and every thread led back to one man. There had never been three masked intruders at all. The truth had been there all along, sealed inside the quiet house in Glyca Nera. When the trial opened, the courtroom was packed with reporters and citizens. Harsh white light spilled over the face of the murderer, tall, short-cropped hair, shirt buttoned up to the collar, a face that seemed almost too young, with eyes empty and unreadable. He entered calmly, fingers interlaced before his chest, as if still believing he could persuade the world with composure alone. But to everyone watching, he was no longer a grieving husband, just a man who had weaponized love, twisting trust into the cruelest snare. The hearings stretched on for weeks. His lawyers clung to the idea of impulse, spoke of loss of control, of a remorseful husband overcome by grief. The prosecution answered not with emotion, but with evidence, timelines, data, and logic, things that could not be bent. They walked the court through his precision, how he arranged the crime scene to erase guilt, how he placed the call in a calculated tone, how nothing he did bore the chaos of panic, only the order of intention. The judges spent hours reviewing photos, analyzing timestamps, listening to each witness. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom fell silent, no applause, no sigh of relief. Justice, they all knew, could do only one thing: name the crime, not undo the loss. The sentence: life imprisonment, plus 11 years. As the words echoed, Babus bowed his head, expressionless. At the edge of the courtroom, a small cradle, Lydia's cradle, was brought out as evidence. Once a tender symbol of safety, it now stood as a relic of innocence violated. The police sealed it carefully in a plastic bag and carried it to the van, cameras flashing in bursts of white. The orphaned child was placed in the care of her maternal grandparents. Weeks later, Caroline's ashes were brought home to Alanisos. On the white shore beneath a pale blue sky, two elderly figures stood hand in hand, holding the urn. They tilted it gently, letting the ashes fall into the clear water. The waves rose softly, carrying her dust into the deep blue, quiet, endless, forgiving. The house in Glyca Nera was left abandoned. Grass swallowed the path. Curtains fluttered in the wind like ghosts that refused to leave. Neighbors said the house still whispered at night, the faint creak of a door, the hiss of air down an empty corridor like a memory that hadn't yet faded. No one speaks his name anymore. But on Alonisos, her name remains Caroline, carried by the wind, in the murmured stories told to visitors, and in the silent eyes of those who had once watched her grow, and then watched her disappear. Her parents now live quietly in a small house overlooking the sea. Each morning, they carry Lydia out to the porch, the very spot where Caroline once sat reading. The little girl has her mother's eyes, bright, clear, and strangely calm. Sometimes she looks toward the horizon, wide-eyed, as if she can sense something still lingering out there. Her father, a retired marine engineer, spends most of his time in a small woodworking shed by the bay. He repaints his daughter's old chair, wipes the dust away, and sets a photo frame upon it. Caroline smiling, her hair lifted gently by the wind. Every evening, he sits by the shore, watching the gold of sunset scatter across the water. Silent, as though speaking to someone only he can still hear. Her mother speaks little. She washes the baby's clothes by hand, folds them neatly, and tucks them into drawers, a quiet ritual of keeping her daughter close, of holding on to what remains. There are no memorials, no ceremonies, only a single sprig of lavender placed where Caroline once loved to sit, its scent left to guide her spirit home. On the island, the wind carries salt and flowers together, mingling with the murmur of the waves. They say that if you listen long enough, you can still hear it, a faint laugh, light as a breeze, the echo of the girl who once said, "The sea of Alanisos tastes like freedom." The headlines have faded. New stories have taken their place. The world has moved on. But the echo of Caroline's murder still hums quietly beneath the noise in every conversation about women lost to violence, in every short report about another life taken by someone once called family. Each time, a new name appears, a daughter, a wife, a mother. People remember Caroline Crouch, the 20-year-old who believed in love so deeply, she never realized she was imprisoned inside her own dream. In Athens, murals of her face still remain a young woman, with wind-swept hair and eyes searching the distance, as if still looking for a way out. Beneath them, a hand-painted line of Greek words reads, Gamma iota alpha, O lambda epsilons, epsilon kappa, epsilon nu epsilons, pi omicron upsilon, delta epsilon u pi, rho O lambda alpha, beta alpha nu alpha, phi omega nu ak, omicron upsilon u, for all the women who never got the chance to scream. The case of Caroline Crouch grew beyond the frame of a domestic tragedy. It became a mirror reflecting the quiet complicity of society, the silence that allowed violence to thrive behind closed doors, beneath the glow of household lights, hidden inside the illusion of harmony. People began to ask the questions no one had dared to before. If someone had heard the dog bark that night, would they have gone outside? If a neighbor had seen the light flicker oddly, would they have knocked? If a young woman said she felt trapped, would anyone have believed her? Those questions were not only for Caroline. They were for everyone who ever believed that love is the safest place, that the light within a home can banish every shadow. But love is not always salvation. Sometimes, it is the very wall that blinds us from seeing danger approach. And the peace we think we see, the smiles, the warm light through a window, may be nothing more than a thin coat of paint over a wall already cracking beneath the surface.